Welcome to Furious Driving. We're back in the garage for another little chat about cars, and this time we're going posh and exciting with supercars, but not the latest crop of mega cars, the classic kind, because, well, let's face it, I don't know about you, but modern supercars leave me a little bit cold. Maybe it's because now 200 miles an hour is like the norm, everything can do it, and even my everyday diesel estate car is limited to 155. Maybe it's because they all look a little bit kind of generically the same for airflow, and they all have automatic gears and driver aids, and anyone can climb in because they're just so easy to drive. It's just not much harder than driving a Nissan Micra, so where's the fun in that? Now, modern supercars, they can go faster, turn harder, stop quicker, but they're somehow less involving and less interesting. Where's the daring do? Where's the magic? Gone. Now, first off, there's the elephant in the room, if you like. There is no such thing as a fun automatic car. This is not up for debate. This is a hill I will die on. You take the gears out of the equation, you remove a big chunk of the enjoyment and the involvement, and supercars should be involving, and the modern ones really aren't, which is why we're looking back in time, really. A proper supercar should be a bit risky, a bit flaky, a stupid piece of rolling art and danger that turns the driver into some kind of hero. Modern ones don't really do that. The old supercars were exotic, and when ordinary everyday cars struggled to reach 3 figures on the speedo, these things were just mind-blowing, but also somehow more relatable, with the makers regularly borrowing from big maker parts bins for things like lights and switches and door handles. If you happen to have a Marina and a supercar with Marina door handles, you could potentially insure them both with Lancaster, as Marker Study now cover classic exotics. So now you're going to ask me what my top 10 classic supercars are, and I'm not even going to include the original, the OG supercar, the Lamborghini Miura. It's too obvious. And I'm not going to include the Testarossa either, even though I had a poster of that on my bedroom wall when I was growing up. Incidentally, that poster came from a computer gaming magazine from the 80s, and it was a Spectrum game and looked nothing like the graphics in the game. And so, like many of my favourite cars, the best ones in my opinion largely come from the 80s and the 90s, and this list will include quite a few from that period. And I'm not doing it in any particular order because, well, you really can't. They're all so different. It's like having a favourite child. So we'll jump in with the two most obvious ones on the list and then go back from there and work into the ones you might not have thought of, hopefully. So first of all, the obvious one to get out of the way, the Ferrari F40. Now, this was the world's first 200-mile-an-hour production car, and it was exciting in a way that nothing has really matched since. It was always going to be special. It was designed for Ferrari's 40th anniversary, and it was the last car that Enzo personally signed off as well. It was developed in just 13 months, and it was built for only 5 years, from 1987 to 1992, and only 1,311 were built. I don't think there's any significance to that number, although there is way more than the 400 that were originally planned. It was designed by Pietro Camardella and Pininfarina, and it was engineered by Nicola Materazzi, who also did its predecessor, the 288 GTO, so proper legendary names attached to it. So the project began completely in a different direction in the early 1980s. They wanted to develop the 288 into a Group B rally car of all things to demonstrate their technology and prowess. But then Group B was cancelled, and so they had a lot of technology, a lot of research sort of sitting around going spare, and they decided to send it off in this new direction. And the F40 was developed in record time, in part because Enzo wanted to have a legacy car. Because he was getting old, he was going to retire. He wanted his name on this car for one last time, and also in time for the 40th anniversary. Behind the driver, under the deck lid, it has got a 2.9 litre 90-degree twin-turbo V8, making 478 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. And that would push it 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds and to 201 miles an hour. Proper supercar numbers back in the 80s. And it was also big supercar money, $400,000 in 1987, which equates to about 1.1 million in today's money. Not a cheap car. It was also the first production car to mainly use composite body panels, and there are only 11 panels in the body because there are large, pressings is the wrong word, but pieces. It's got a tubular space frame chassis, bonded Kevlar panels, and carbon fibre doors and boot lid. So with all that kind of weight-saving modern technology, it only weighs 1,100 kilos, and it looks breathtaking. It just looks like an aggressive monster on the road, like something that's escaped from a racetrack, and that's really what a supercar should do. And it's got pop-up headlights. pure 80s glamour. Right, car number 2 is the other very obvious car we've really got to get out of the way. This is the Lamborghini Countach. This is the epitome of what supercars are all about. Wild, ridiculous, almost unusable drama. It's hard to get in and out of, it's uncomfortable when you're in it, the visibility is appalling, but that all just adds to the myth and the legend. If you remember Clarkson reversing one sitting on the door frame with the scissor doors open, it all just adds to the car's mystique and magic, just being terrible but wonderful at the same time. It was designed to replace the Miura, and so it still had the 3.9 litre V12 behind the driver. That eventually grew to 5.2 litres over the car's quite long lifetime. And Marcello Gandini, working at Bertoni, he swapped the graceful curves of the Miura for very, very sharp lines for the new decade of the 1970s. And in doing so, he created a visual legend. It was revealed to the world in 1971, launched in 1974, and stayed in production through very, very, very many updates and iterations all the way through to 1990. It's definitely not the best supercar to drive, but it is the only one to be seen in. Right, that is the obvious one to get out of the way. There's a lot more to say about both of those cars, but we'll just move swiftly on. There are 10 cars to get through after all. Now this is a great homegrown hero. This is one for the Brits to go yes to. This is the Lotus Esprit Turbo. Not just the Esprit, the Turbo. And it is Lotus doing what small British car makers do absolutely the best. Defy the odds, punch above their weight in terms of innovation and ambition, and just utilise the most incredible homegrown innovation and then break catastrophically before the first tank of fuel is empty. But hey, James Bond drove one, so, you know, it's all cool. Now, the Esprit had been around since 1974, same as the Countach in fact, and it looks remarkably similar in its kind of side profile. And in 1981, the Series 3 came out with slight updates to the visual styling of the Giugiaro bodywork. And it came to 2.2 litre dry sump 4-cylinder. But in 1980, the first factory turbo appeared, badged as the Essex Turbo Esprit, and it was named after their racing sponsor, the Essex Overseas Petroleum Corporation, and it was the first official factory car, but that's not the car we're talking about here. The Series 3 Turbo Esprit used the Type 912 engine, which made 210 horsepower and gave it a 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. It also had the backbone chassis, which was donated to the DeLorean, but the biggest claim to fame, which nails it into popular culture for me, is the fact it had a computer game named after it, Turbo Esprit, available on the Spectrum 48K and the Commodore 64. If that doesn't make your car super, I don't know what does. Now, this one is one that I absolutely love. If I was going to buy a supercar, this is among the 3 that I think I would be jumping out to buy tomorrow if I won the lottery. This is the Porsche 959. Now, the 911 was already cool and fast and a little bit everyday to be a supercar, but it was, you know, the everyday supercar as people call it. The 959 though was on another level. It's above the top of the frame, can't even see it on the screen, that's how high it is. This is probably the car that made me like four-wheel drive cars so much. Now, it started life in 1981 as a test mule for a new four-wheel drive system for Porsche and as the basis of a potential 911 replacement. And the idea was to send it off to Group B rallying, which was the ultimate crucible of endurance testing and proving that cars could do incredible stuff. Of course, Group B got cancelled, so then it got off to do other motorsport instead. I think they did them in the Paris-Dakar, didn't they? But under that beautiful so 80s Porsche skin, it had a sequential twin turbo double overhead cam 2.9 litre flat 6 with fuel injection, air-cooled cylinders and water-cooled heads, a 6-speed manual gearbox with PSK 4-wheel drive system. It made 444 horsepower and 500 newton meters of torque, and the lightweight shell was made of aluminium and Kevlar composite and a Nomex floor. Now, the road-going version was shown at the 1985 Frankfurt show and went on sale in 1986 at a cost of $225,000, which is actually less than half what it cost to build, which is shocking, but it was a showpiece of technology rather than a thing designed to be profitable. 337 were built in total, including 37 prototypes, and that is a number that actually genuinely shocked me when I read it during research. I thought there'd be like 1,000 of the things at least. Fun fact though, Bill Gates bought one in 1988 and tried to import it to America, but it was confiscated by the import authorities and held until 1999 when the show and display rules came in, meaning he could own his car but not drive it on the road until it hit 25. Now, moving away from the exotica of the 959, we meet Ford's homegrown blue-collar hero, the Sierra Cosworth RS 500. Your dad's company car, but fast enough to frighten a Ferrari. The RS 500 was a very rare edition of an already fairly rare car. Now the Sierra Cosworth, which was a more common car if you like, it was built from 1986 to 1982, but the RS 500 edition, the RS 500 only built in 1987. It sprung from a Ford Motorsport project to race in, and more importantly to win, Group A touring cars in Europe. A bit like Le Mans 66, but for the 80s, so with more shoulder pads and Stock Aitken and Dennis Waterman on the car radio cassette. In fact, the project was started by Stuart Turner when he became head of Ford Motorsport in 1983, and he was helped out by Walter Hayes, who had actually been behind the GT40 project to win Le Mans, also behind the Cosworth DFV engine project. So they went off to Cosworth and had a look at their YAA Pinto twin-cam 16-valve prototype engine project, which with the addition of a turbo became the YBB, the legendary YBB, which made 180 horsepower in street form and 300 horsepower for racing, and significantly more in the hands of tuners ever since. Now the distinctive whale tail was all function and internally hated. This is the thing that really sort of makes the RS 500 and the Cosworth stand out, is that whale tail. But as the early Sierra body style actually generated lift at high speed above 100 miles an hour, it was actually essential for keeping the car on the ground at the back. Now Ford obviously had to sell a certain number of cars to meet homologation rules, and part of doing that they decided to do a UK only special edition called the RS 500. So in 87 they took 500 cars taken off the production line and sent to Tickford Engineering to be converted. So the RS 500 got a bigger turbo, bigger intercooler, a second row of injectors and fuel rail, which were fitted but not connected up on the road cars, an uprated fuel pump, uprated oil and cooling systems, and on the back there was a lower second spoiler and an extra lip on the whale tail to generate more downforce. And it made 224 horsepower and 277 newton meters of torque. All 500 were made for the UK market, and most were stolen or crashed within the first 6 months, probably. Now, sticking with the blue oval, it is quite warm in here today, we're going to go to my second of my would 100% buy if I won the lottery cars. The RS 200. These things are just phenomenal. These were Group B rallying personified for me back in the 80s. This is Ford's original supercar, if you ignore the GT40. Now the Group B rallying genre gave us so much, but my absolute favourite of these, as I say, was the RS 200. Ford went all out to dominate the insane world of Group B. Now Ford were big into their racing in the past. They would spend a lot of money trying to, like I say, dominate particular sports fields and be the king of it. And they released the RS 200 in 1985 in time to just race for one season before the carnage just got too much, including a terrible accident in Portugal involving an RS 200 in which 3 spectators were sadly killed, and Group B was banned in 1987, so didn't get a good chance to prove itself. Now, the RS 200 did live on though in rallycross and hill climbing, and one was even specifically built for Pikes Peak, which I think it did quite well in. The car was pretty advanced for the mid-80s. It's got an aluminium, steel and carbon fibre central tub and space frames front and rear to carry the suspension and the engine. It has a Cosworth twin-cam 1.8 litre turbo sitting behind the driver, making 250 horsepower, and the four-wheel drive system has a 37-63 front to rear split, which could also be adjusted to 50-50 split or even made 100% rear-wheel drive depending on what situation you're racing the car in. And it went 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds and a top speed of 140 miles an hour, which is relatively swift if you're in Kielder Forest, for example. Ford had to sell 200 road cars for homologation, and they outsourced building the cars to Reliant, who are handy with a bit of fiberglass, which is what the body was made of. But sales were slow as the Halo series of Group B had gone, and the cars, which were all built by January 1986, were crudely finished, as they were basically racing cars, and only 158 were sold. So 50 were brought back by Ford to be up-optioned and improved and resold, and eventually all of them were gone by 1990. Now, to my eyes, and I'm not going to take many arguments on this either, Ian Callum, who did the Jaguar XF amongst many other things, and Filippo Sapino at Ghia created the perfect 1980s jelly mould supercar. And Tony Southgate and John Wheeler engineered an exceptional chassis. Now, I've had a passenger ride around Brands Hatch in one of these things, and we overtook a new Lotus Elise on the wrong side of Druid's hairpin, going I don't know how fast, and just left it in its absolute dust. These things were unstoppable, so manoeuvrable, so much grip, and so unbreakable. There's also another thing I remember from a rally back in, I guess, the late 80s, when one of these things came off the road in a forest, it pinwheeled through a ditch, the spectators quickly pushed it back on its wheels and back on the road, and it got back onto the track and still finished relatively well in that stage. They are just ridiculous monsters. Now, sticking with sort of British stuff, I think it is really, we've got another of the cars which I actually would buy with my own money if I possibly could. This is the beautiful Jaguar XJ220. It is one of those cars which is one of the most beautiful cars you're ever going to see. But maybe this should have been on the list of greatest could have beens. But just look at the XJ220. It is a contender for the most beautiful car on the list. I think it has to be, really. But also the most overpromised and under-delivered. Conceptually, it was based on the incredible Jaguar Le Mans racing cars of the late 1980s. They have a very similar kind of side profile and layout. When they showed the concept car, which was a mid to rear engine V12 and four-wheel drive, they took £1,550,000 deposits at the 1988 British Motor Show. That was the strength of lust people had for this car when they first saw it. Now, reality though did step in with a crunch, and the 1992 customer delivery cars looked very similar, but ended up with a turbocharged 3.5 litre V6 and rear-wheel drive only. Might not sound like a big engine, but that made 542 horsepower, which is 42 more than the V12 had promised. But it wasn't as exciting to look at, or sound I guess, and also it had 644 Newton meters of torque and had a viscous coupling limited slip diff in the rear axle, which the designers felt would give as much traction as four-wheel drive in most situations. And proper supercar numbers here, the XJ220 managed 217 miles an hour at Nardo, making it the new fastest production car in the world, taking that accolade away from the F40. It was also one of the most expensive cars in the world, costing £470,000 in 1992, which is the approximate equivalent in 2025 money of about £1.25 million. Yeah, that's a lot of money. And so if you're disappointed with the spec, you might want your deposit back. And those on-paper spec changes and the 1990s recession meant they only built 275 of them. So even less than the Porsche 959. Now, the next one is a car you might imagine is incredibly rare, but is commonplace. Volkswagen Beetle commonplace in comparison. This is the Alfa Romeo Montreal. This is the oldest car on the list, in fact, but one of the most supercar-y of all the supercars. So V8 engine, check. Jaw-dropping good looks, check. Concept car literally put into production, check, check, check. So yeah, the Montreal was first shown as a concept in Expo 67 in Montreal in 1967. They didn't give it a name, so people started calling the Gandini designed car just the Montreal, and it stuck. The production car was shown in Geneva in 1970, but no one called it the Geneva. They'd stuck with Montreal at that point. Visually, it was very much the same. The body shape, the stepladder up the C-post, the cutaways over the headlights, they'd all stayed there. But whereas the concept just had a 1.6 litre engine out of a Giulia, I think, or a Giulietta, just to make it move, the production car had a 2.6 litre 90-degree cross-plane V8 and a 5-speed manual with limited slip diff. So exotic stuff in 1970. It was more expensive than an E-Type or a 911, but it's far more exclusive, much more exotic, and curiously they never sought type approval to sell it in the USA and Canada, so you couldn't get one for 25 years. In total they built 3,917 before production ended in 1977. And if ever you see one, it will stop traffic and drop jaws at 100 paces. Now, number 9 on our list is another car where motorsport came a-calling and we all got a supercar out the back of it. This is the BMW M1. You know those BMW 316s and 320Ds which have got the M Sport badge and the 3-colour radiator grille fins on them? This is where it all started. The designers would be so proud. But this, the M1, was the real thing. A mid-engine homologation special, hand-built and with input from Lamborghini. This is a car with proper pedigree. the real ultimate driver's machine. The BMW E26 M1 was built from 1977 to 1981, a short run a long time ago. And the idea had been that Lamborghini could build a road-going version of the BMW race car in order to meet homologation requirements. But that deal fell apart because it turned out Lamborghini couldn't meet those needs at all, and BMW took it kind of all back in-house. Lamborghini had been involved in the development of the M1, and Gianpaolo Dallara had designed the tubular steel space frame chassis, and meanwhile the glass fibre bodywork was designed by Giugiaro and inspired by the 1972 BMW Turbo concept. The intention had been to build it and race it against Porsche in Group 5 racing. Unfortunately, design delays and production delays and then changes in the race specifications meant it never got to race in that and got raced in Group 4 instead, and in endless historic series ever since, of course. The body shell was made by Trattamento Italiano Resina and the chassis by Marchesi, both in Italy, and the engine was hand-built in-house by BMW, and all the parts were sent to Bauer for assembly. Bauer, of course, did the 3 Series convertibles and other special projects for BMW back then. The engine is a 3.4 litre twin-cam M88/1 straight 6 with fuel injection and 6 separate throttle bodies. If you've ever been lucky enough to be standing near one of these things when it fires up, that is not an experience you will forget in a hurry. It is earth-shatteringly loud and sounds so good. And this is actually another car I've been lucky enough to have a passenger ride in. Even just on the road, it's something that I will never forget. It's just a monumental occasion just to be in one of these things. But of course it was the first car developed by BMW's M division, and only 453 were built. Again, tiny numbers. 399 of them were road-going cars, which is mind-boggling, and 53 of them for motorsport. And considering it was built primarily for motorsport, that is a really odd way of the numbers stacking up, but it does make it one of the rarest BMWs ever made. Now, the last car on our list, the Bugatti EB110. Now, we all know that Volkswagen have owned Bugatti since 1998, and the original company was started in 1909 by Italian-born Ettore Bugatti in the Alsace, which is now part of France but was then part of Germany. But after his death in 1947, the company went a bit quiet and changed direction, and was eventually sold to Hispano-Suiza in 1963, who wanted it for its aircraft parts manufacturing business. But there is a middle part to this story, and there are some great names in the world of supercars attached to it. In 1987, the Bugatti automobile brand was bought by Italian Romano Bartoli, and he also bought Lotus, and that fact will become relevant later. He built a new factory in Modena and took on Paolo Stanzini, who'd worked on all the Lamborghinis, as his technical director. A team of Lamborghini alumni got to work on the chassis and the engine, and the initial exterior design came from Marcello Gandini, and we see the same names over and over in these stories. Later, Stanzini left after disagreements over his choice of an aluminium honeycomb chassis, and Nicola Materazzi, a name we've also heard earlier in this story, who'd worked on the Ferrari 288 GTO and the F40, replaced him and his chassis with a carbon fibre one. The EB110 was unveiled to enormous fanfare, well, publicity I should say, at the Arch de la Défense in Paris, and a huge gala at Versailles for 1,700 people. I think the stats of the car's launch are more impressive than the car's performance, which could do 0 to 60 in 3.4 and 212.5 miles an hour. Only 139 EB110s were built, and 1 or possibly 2 prototype EB112 saloons were made, and those, interestingly, are sometimes seen knocking around in Monaco before the company went bust in 1995. And here's the kicker: after Bugatti went bust, Lotus was sold to Proton. So there you go, that is my top 10 of the supercars that if I won £1 billion on the lottery I would rush out and buy. So do you think I've put the right cars in my top 10? Should I have included something else, or should I have dropped something that you don't really think is supercar enough? Do you wrongly disagree with me that automatics can be fun, because they can't? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you as always for watching, and join me again next time, driving or fixing something completely different.